Hey guys, so me and Renato are just going to put together a quick video, just an overview of bilevel. For one, how we're going to use it, why we're going to use it, how we're going to wean our patients off of it. Okay, so the number one indication for the use of bilevel is going to be us not being able to oxygenate our patients. Okay, most of the time that'll be secondary to ARDS-like pathways, right? So we have really, really stiff lungs that we just cannot oxygenate whatsoever. All right, so right here on the vent, you can see I kind of have us set up in a generic trauma-like settings, right? 18-400, a little bit of pressure support, PEEP of 8. We're going to assume our FiO2 is at 100%. We don't have an O2 tank on the back, so we're just going to pretend like that's a really, really high oxygen, okay? That being said, there's a couple startup settings that are fixed. In other words, they will never change. They will always be the same. And then there's a couple that we're going to use and manipulate per our patient, okay? So first things first, how do we get to bilevel? We're going to come right here, just like we would switch to any other mode, okay? And you see right here, it says bilevel. You push that. Once you push that, it'll transfer everything over, okay? So just going through the initial settings, we have our frequency, our P high, P low, our T high, pressure support, oxygenation. Everything else, we're not going to fool with. The only things that I just went over are the ones we're going to manipulate per our patient, okay? So everybody, Renata came up with these badge buddies. I'm going to go through it here, but you can see this will be step-by-step through your badge buddy as well, all right? So going to the frequency, anywhere from 10 to 15 is going to be where we start. A couple questions I always get is, Luke, what if the patient's on a frequency of 20, 22, 23? Does not matter. We're going to start our patients in bilevel mode between 10 and 15. So we'll come here, we'll put them on 12 as a happy medium, okay? Now, P high. P high is something that we're going to derive from our patient itself. It's one of those settings that we're going to need our patient to give us information so we can set our initial setting, okay? If your patient is currently on volume control, like most of our patients will, you're going to take your patient's plateau pressure. Whatever your plateau pressure is, you are going to use that exact pressure to use for your P high, okay? That being said, in the odd instance that your patient's on pressure control, you're going to take your set peak inspiratory pressure, your setting, and use that as your pressure high, okay? Caveat to both of those things is we will never succeed a pressure of 30. In other words, if your patient's plateau pressure is 33, 34, which is not uncommon for a patient with really, really stiff lungs, we're just going to go ahead and set that patient's P high at 30, okay? So we're going to assume we got really, really stiff lungs, our plateau pressures are through the roof. We're going to put this guy or gal's P high at 30.
And I know according to your card, it says peak inspiratory pressure, but do remember we're taking the plateau for most of our patients.
So on your card, it says that because that's coming from a pressure control mode. In most cases here in this setting will be coming from a volume control. So just remember plateau pressure, okay? P low, that's something that we're gonna set and it's gonna be the same every single time, which is just gonna be 3. Okay, we'll never manipulate that, we'll never change it. It's just gonna be set at 3 and that's all we need to know about that, okay? Now, T high. When you push bilevel, it's going to preload all of these settings, which will preload you T high. We are not going to manipulate T high. We are going to need to manipulate T low. How do we switch T high to T low? You're going to come down here to your 3 lock buttons. Okay, there's going to be 3. This one will be for your T high. This will give you an I to E ratio. And then this one right here, if you can see right here, it says T low. Okay? Once you switch it to T low, which you'll have to do when you convert it to bilevel, you're going to come here. On your card, your starting point will be 0.4 to 0.8 seconds. So you'll come here, select this, scroll it all the way down, all the way down. Your vent's going to give you a warning. Say, hey, you're getting into a weird I to E ratio, right? All you have to do to bypass this is come to the left and push continue. You continue to go down. I'm going to give you another warning. Say, hey, your T low is too low. We're going to bypass this the same way we did with the other one and push continue. Now it'll allow you to get to that inverse ratio kind of stuff right here.
Which you can see right above the top. That inverse ratio, that 1 to 3, 1 to 2 is now a 6 to 1.
Okay. And then 0.4 to 0.8 is going to be your starting window. I'll start at 0.6 right in the middle. All right. Now, pressure support will always be 0. Your FiO2 will be whatever the patient was currently on prior, which most likely will be 100%. Because remember that we're putting this patient in this mode because we're having trouble oxygenating these patients. So almost in all cases, we'll have them on 100%. Okay? Everything else has no need to be messed with. On your badge buddy, it does say to raise the sensitivity between 5 and 10. You absolutely can do that. It is not wrong if you do that, but it is unnecessary and you don't need to do that if you don't want to. Okay? So we have our patient ready to go. These are our initial settings. Once you push accept, if you want to come over here and watch the lung, it's going to bring it up to that P high and then drop it down. So just by looking at this is what's going to be happening inside of your patient, okay? So once you switch over, you can look at your patient. You're going to see them inflate, holding them at that high T high time, and then we're going to drop them down. Okay? Now, once your patient's on your settings, you know that we're at the appropriate pressure because we got that from our plateau pressure, right? We know we're at our frequency times. We know our P low never changes. What's the one thing we need to adjust to optimize our lung expansion is going to be our T low. On your badge buddy, it's going to reference your peak expiratory flow rate and how long you need to set your T low to reach a goal of 75% of that. And all that means is when we inflate our patient's lungs 12 times a minute, we're going to drop them from that pressure, right? That's where your frequency comes from. During that 12 breaths, we're going to drop them for 0.6 seconds, okay? But during that 0.6 seconds, we want to make sure that we're not collapsing those lungs. That's why we need to know our peak expiratory flow rate to where we can adjust to stop that lung at an appropriate time to where we keep our oxygenation obviously good, and then our compliance and our alveoli open, okay? How do we do all that mumbo jumbo, right? We need to know two things. We need to know, one, what is our peak expiratory flow rate? And two, what is 75% of that? So how do we do that? What I encourage everybody to do, at these three icons right here, you have this icon right here, which will give you multiple selections of all your loops and scalars and all the things. I would recommend everybody just to pull up all your tables, okay? Once you have all your tables pulled up, you're gonna look for your flow time scalar, which is this guy right here, okay? Here's your flow and here's your time. How to enlarge it, at the top right of every single one of the tables is a little arrow. You'll just push that arrow. It's gonna expand it open, okay? Once you have this, you're gonna come over here to the pause button and push pause. It's gonna cycle through a breath and it's gonna stop it, okay? At this point, you can take your toggle and come all the way down. Yellow is expiration and green is inspiration. So we know we need our peak expiratory flow rate. So we're gonna go all the way down to the bottom, at our bottommost point on our yellow side. There's your peak expiratory flow rate. If you come over to the left, it'll give you a numerical value, which is 95.8. Make it a nice even number. If it's 95.8, make it 95. If it's 93.2, make it 93. Whatever the closest number that makes your brain happy, make it that way. So we're gonna make this one, I like 5, so we're gonna say this is 95, okay? Now,
I would have said 96.
96?
Okay.
Okay,
No,
well,
I'm just playing. It's
even
95.
numbers for everybody. I like 95. So we'll take 95, okay? Remember Luke said the yellow is expiration, the green is inspiration. So at this point is where we're triggering into inspiration, okay? So remember the two things I always said we needed to know. We needed to know our peak expiratory flow rate, which is 95, and we need to know 75% of that. Okay, so once you get that 95, you're going to take out your fancy calculator, okay? Whatever your peak expiratory flow rate is, you're going to take that number and multiply it times 0.75, okay? So you'll do 95 times 0.75, and then it's 71. So you know now that when we trigger into inspiration, when that green starts to come up, that's our inspiratory. We need to have our peak expiratory flow rate stop, or inspiration start, at 75. Okay, so right now we're at 61. So what that means is that's not the number we want, right? We need to stop that lung before it gets to 61. So what's happening in your body is your lung are coming up at the outermost part of that peak inspiratory pressure, that P high. The flow, when we release that lung, is the fastest in the beginning. And as that lung contracts, it slows down. So we need to stop that. In this scenario, we need to stop it at a flow of 75. Right now, the lung is going too long and it's slowing down too much. So we need to adjust our T low to where we stop that lung from collapsing sooner. How do we do that? We reduce our time low. In other words, instead of giving that lung more time or the same amount of time to collapse, we give it less to where we stop it at that happy 75%, right? So if we come down here and we know that we're triggering into inspiration at 61, we need to drop this T low down to 0.1 or 0.2 at a time. Generally speaking, it'll be 0.1 because on your patient lung, it'll be much more aggressive. So we'll go to 0.5 and push accept. You will push pause again to let it run. Again, once you change a setting, it's going to bring you to your home screen. So you'll go back to your scaler, make it big and pretty again, if it'll let me. Okay, you push your pause button. Oh my goodness. Okay, so if you go down to your peak expiratory flow rate, which should not change, right? We're about 95. You come up to where you want to be. We said we wanted to be at 75. We're right now at 63. So we're making progress. Okay, so you're going to continue to play this game until you get to that number that you like, right? So we'll go down again, 0.4, 0.3, whatever it takes to get to that 75%. In most cases, I don't think the physicians will want you to go under 0.4. So if you get to that point and you're not quite at that 75% mark, that's okay. It is a window and every patient's different, right? Get it to close to that 75% as you can for your patient, okay? So just to do this, I made it 0.3, which you'll never go this low, but just for the sake of the experiment here, we'll pause it again. Now we're at 90, 95 about, right? And then now we're right at that 74, 75. So for this patient and this patient's lungs particularly, this is exactly where we want to be, right? So within the patient, we're keeping them at the pressure that is appropriate for their lung tissue to recruit alveoli to oxygenate, right? We're dropping them 12 times a minute to aid in ventilation, but we're only dropping them for 0.3 seconds at a time to where we're not letting their lungs over collapse, causing peripheral collapse and all those things. So we're keeping the lungs happy throughout the whole time. Okay, so right now this is exactly where you would keep your patient in this therapeutic kind of mode until the patient either improves or goes backwards, right? So as far as what to look for when you make all of these changes, obviously these patients should have heart lines. You're going to be constantly watching their blood pressure and all the changes in their patient, okay? All this being said, there's going to be transition times, right? You're not going to flip this patient on and everything's going to be better right away. It's going to take time, okay? So just kind of ride the wave, for lack of better words, until those lungs can slowly start to pop open, okay? And obviously you'll be continuously running blood gases and things like that, okay? The longer these patients on, theoretically, the more time you keep them at that high safe pressure, the more time you give those lungs to improve. Oxygenation will improve and lung compliance will improve, okay? How do we wean now? We're going to go to that, all right?